3 words, large enough to tip the world. I remember you.
Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks with your co-hosts, me, Ramya Amudan, and Jacob Szymanski.
Hola.
What's up? And we are going to get right into it. We got so much jam-packed in the next 56-minute podcast. I didn't count any of the breaks, so, your hour. But this weekly quote is what's going to kick off basically the first half of this show. It's from The Invisible Life of Addy Leroux, and it's written by V.E. Schwab. And we want to discuss it. We're going to go into it with a bunch of other people who have read it. I think I've told you that I've been talking about this book for the last 2 years. You probably heard it on the pod as well. But before we get to that, let's quickly tell you what's on the CELA homepage. This is at celalibrary.ca, and there you can find all the catalog from the Center for Equitable Library Access, including the 3 titles they have up top, which are The Whispers by Ashley Audrain. This is a suspense and thrillers title. The Wager by David Graham, which is a historical title. And The Misses by E.L. James, for all you romance lovers out there. On today's episode, we're going to Jacob, you wrote this. I love it. We're going to make an effort to live up to the show's name and actually review a book for once. My goodness.
No more fooling around, okay? We can't not live up to the name. Let's actually do what we're supposed to be doing.
Let's do it. I mean, technically, I lived up to it season 3, episode 1, because we reviewed The Whispers. But yeah, I'm not going to bring it up. And also, we're doing this with myself, Jacob, and 2 other people who've read the book. Amer Khan, who, if you've been paying attention, it's that time of the month that we check in with Amer Khan anyway. So he's joining us up top. And Debby Giroux for The Invisible Life of Addy Leroux. Debby, Amer, what's up?
Welcome.
Hey.
Nice to have you on. So who really read this book first? Amer, it was you, right?
Yes, I actually read it based on, I believe, Oprah book review, book picks. I just randomly picked it out, and the title looked interesting. I half read the synopsis like I usually do and just dove right in.
Yeah, that's not atypical. And then you brought it to the book club. I read it, fell in love with it. Debby read it, fell in love with it. And sorry, I don't mean to give people the phrasing that they would use to describe the book. But then, Jay, you're the last one to read it.
Yeah, I just read it recently, and I have thoughts. Before we dive too deep into it, though, why don't we read a quick synopsis?
Yep, let's do that. So here's the synopsis of The Invisible Life of Addy Leroux by V.E. Schwab. France, 1714. In a moment of desperation, a young woman makes a vows in bargain to live forever in this curse to be forgotten by everyone she meets. Thus begins the extraordinary life of Addy Leroux and the dazzling adventure that will play out across centuries and continents, across history and art, as a young woman learns how far she will go to leave her mark on the world. Ooh.
Great synopsis writing there.
Yes.
Why don't we go around the table and just quick thoughts from everyone? Debby, you want to go first?
So, yes, I read the book at the recommendation of Amer and loved it. I thought it was beautifully written. It was like poetry, but easy to understand poetry. The story was fascinating. Like, I'm on my 3rd time reading this book.
3rd time?
3rd time.
Whoa. It's a long book.
It is a long book, but it's so good it goes by really quickly.
No, it's true. It's true. I love how everyone else is silent through this. Okay, fine. We'll get around to Jacob's thoughts in a second. Amer, how many times did you read the book?
I've read it only once.
Oh, okay.
But I do recall you telling me that this book is pretty much quotable at almost any section. I mean, if it was a physical copy, if you opened it up to like almost any part of it, the word choice, it's such a rich story, and it's written so well that nearly every line in the book is quotable and makes you think and is beautifully written.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of us, when we read this book, this immediately became number 1 book for us in terms of, if we had to recommend a book to somebody. I mean, this one is usually at the top of my list, unless they've already read it. But it's just one of these books that just done so darn well that, it's really hard to beat.
I think we'll get to some actual quotes in a bit too, because I just go through Goodreads and walk through the quotes over and over again.
It's just a treasure trove of great
Yeah.
quotes. And like you say, you can just turn to any page and everything is beautiful. Like in
Poetic.
going around this table and just reading reviews online, that's something that seems to be unanimous is this book is beautifully written. Amazing prose. Rams, what did you think of the
Yeah.
book?
That's honestly what caught my attention and kept it the entire time. I think we'll get into some of like the things that I did not pay attention to, like plot or referencing or any of that stuff, because the writing itself just carried this book for me. I loved the narration. It was Julia Whalen, right, who narrated this book?
That's right, yeah.
Oh,
correct.
so good.
She's fantastic.
She's amazing. And she brought the book to life. But when I say life, I don't mean that, we were springing off the pages with absolute like energy. I just mean you were almost on this lazy river ride through the entirety of the book. And that's because of the flow of the writing with the flow of her voice and her presentation and performance just kept it rolling. I honestly, I was having a glitch. I think, Debbie, you can attest to this as well. I was having a glitch while reading this book where it would start all over from the beginning. This was when the Sela folks were going through like a major overhaul of the app and the system. So it was glitching out, sadly, through this experience for me, and it would start over. And that was the only time of frustration because every other time I was like, I am ready to cozy up and read Addy Leroux.
Does that mean you read the start of the book like 10 times?
Yes. minimum 10 times.
And I think this book sort of gets a slow roll going. I mean,
Yeah.
for me, again, I didn't bother to read the synopsis too closely, so there's a bit of world building at the beginning, but it's so worth it. Like the author does a fantastic job of putting those pieces together in terms of this. These are the parameters of Addy's curse, and you have to learn about them at the same time as Addy. It's not sort of a given for either the main character or for the reader. You're sort of learning together as to what's going on, and I found that really good. And from my perspective, I know I say this about a lot of books that I read, but the book is also multi-layered in terms of you can get in as much as you can get out of it as much as you put in. As you said earlier, Ramya, there's references in the book to major points in history, and if you're not a big history buff, you may not know what those are, and you can look those up later.
And it spans 300 years of history, right?
Clearly, yeah.
Exactly. It spans a really big part. And the other part that I think sets this book apart is the art that's involved as well. It's not just the beauty of the writing, is that there's actual art referenced throughout the book. And if you pay close attention, again, you can pick up these references and pieces. One of my personal favorites was a motif that was described on an elevator in New York City. And I I had to look it up because I was very curious. And
yeah. Do you remember any specifics of like description or art from those scenes that stuck out to you?
The one that stuck out is, I think it is in New York City, where she goes to her and Henry. They go out to Amer, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was called the High Line. And there's a whole bunch of activities, different sensory activities that they go through, and I'm like, oh my God, somebody needs to design this for people to actually do, because it sounded so fun. I think they went through a room where there was, I have a really bad memory for stuff, because it's the book is so good that I read something, I absorb it, then I go to another part of the book and I absorb that. It's just it is like everything, all the descriptions are they're so amazing, but they're not super long. It's she doesn't spend too much time describing something, but long enough that you could really get a sense of what they're describing. And you're right, you can take as much of the book as you need to when they talk about the historical points or art. You might be like, oh, I don't know what that is, but it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't make the book, it just makes it interesting.
Well, it doesn't make you feel like you don't know anything about it, right? Like
exactly. Thank you.
It's still very
you're
easy
still
to
in
read.
on it. Exactly. Jacob, I'm curious about your thoughts on that, though. The line that Debbie said, it describes enough, or it describes for a reasonable amount of time, but not so long that you feel like it's going on forever. Do you have any perspectives on just how descriptions were done?
Well, the writing was amazing in this book that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that applies to all the descriptions too. Now, it's what she chooses to describe that, to be honest, I kind of had issues with a little bit because, listen, it's a
You're getting
17-hour
defensive.
book.
It's us against him, guys.
It's
Just
a
kidding.
17, well, kind of. It's a 17-hour book that's very light on plot.
Mm.
And I think about 8 hours through, halfway, I started telling myself, like, what is this? What am I reading? And I texted Ramya saying, like, when does this get
When
good?
does it get any better?
When does stuff happen? But I got into it after a little while, once I understood what it was all about. Because I read the genre tag, which was fantasy, and fantasy is typically very plot-driven.
And
this
you're a
is
huge
not
fantasy
that.
reader.
I'm a big fantasy reader, so I kind of had an expectation going into it.
I almost feel like this should be rebranded as historical fantasy fiction or something.
Absolutely.
I would barely call this fantasy.
I agree because Ramia's description of a lazy river, I'm like, you know what? That's amazing. Because you're right, Jacob. It's not a book full of plots and action. It's just a nice lazy
It's a slow
book.
ride. The concept
very vivid
itself,
read,
right, is fantasy because she's selling herself or soul to the devil, and then there's this curse, and we're walking through the curse with her. But really, as you said, Jacob, we're not like, what is it? Like, there's no real world building. There's no real, episodes of plot or that kind of snowball effect of things going on, which leads to other things going on. It's very much just, here's the curse, and that's what we're living with for 17 hours.
I would even go as far as to call it melodramatic at times. And at first, I thought that was a bit on the narrator. I'm like, oh, this is so like melodramatic. Like it's so overly intense. And then I realized afterwards, I'm like, oh, it's just the writing. Because it really wanted to hammer home the point that this curse of immortality, but with the caveat that nobody ever remembers you, is horrible and painful, and it just
would you rather
puts Addy in situations over and over and over again just to hammer home that point, and that got to me. But I started enjoying the descriptions just for the sake of it. Like Addy and Henry go out quite a bit in the present timeline just to go and get to know each other. Basically, just going on dates, meeting each other's families and stuff like that. And I had fun with that. Like when they go to that weird nightclub that's built in the old decommissioned subway lines.
So
and
good.
how it describes the sound bouncing off all of these maze-like utility tunnels underground.
Yes.
Oh, like that sounds super
that was
cool.
so cool.
Yeah, it was super cool. But did it push the plot along?
No.
No.
Not the point.
But yeah, not the point. Exactly. I'm just being a hater. But like, honestly, no. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was once I got to that point.
Here's a question. Did you feel invested in Addy?
No.
Okay. Well, yeah. Because around the table, I think the rest of us are totally invested in Addy. We're just like, oh my God, girl, I feel for you. Hundreds of years or however long it was that she's got a deal. And the love affairs and the sadness and the loneliness and all of that, where you're just like.
And the fact that she couldn't keep anything.
Yeah.
Right? Like it was interesting that she couldn't write. She couldn't, she couldn't accumulate stuff. Like she just steal and sometimes you're like, okay, this is cool because she would spill something and the stain would clean itself up. And I'm like, oh man, if only that could happen in real life.
Yeah, the little things.
But the thing is it always comes to that whole old adage, be careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah, I think this whole book is be careful what you wish for.
Right.
That's the concept. Amer, you were saying vivid?
I was saying it's such a vivid book in terms of its descriptions and in pieces too. I mean, Debbie was talking earlier about, I'm going to use a big word today, penultimate scene in the book where, they're in the High Line and she discovers that, she can work with Henry to actually write things down which are permanent. And that's such a turning point in the book, and that those scenes are so vivid from the High Line. But the word choices too. I mean, they describe Henry's sister, and she takes these pills for anxiety or whatever, and the pills are described as little pink umbrellas. which I thought was was a fantastic word choice for something of that nature.
Yeah.
Or Henry describes his sister as a strong perfume. You can only take it in small doses.
Oof.
I thought that was
That's
hilarious.
brilliant.
We all know
We
people
all
like
know
that.
people like that,
Yeah.
don't we?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like you love them, but in small doses.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and after reading and sitting with the book for a while, you understand where the author came from in terms of why this book sort of came into existence, right? I mean, I think the concept of wouldn't it be nice if you could live forever, and then sort of going from there and being like, okay, let's put some parameters around that. You know, Addie doesn't get old either, so she's got eternal youth along with the immortality, but let's put some things in, you know, some boundaries here and see what happens. And that's the primary focus of the book. And a lot of the scenes are basically there to reinforce that sort of concept in terms of, you
Yeah.
know, if you make this sort of deal, can you live with it?
Exactly. No, that's actually a really good question. We're really sitting with the philosophy of this quote curse, right? Or this deal that she made, let's say. And I don't think throughout the book you're being swayed one way or the other. Like you obviously you're seeing the realities of Addie, and that's presented as she's getting, upset about it, trying to find the silver linings, trying to make it through the immortal life she has. But also, if we had answered the question initially, would you take a deal with the devil for these this deal? Are we being swayed throughout the book? And I guess that's what the 17 hours explores. It's actually
Yeah,
shocking. I never took in that it was that long, Jacob.
Yeah,
until
it's
And
a
we
long
would
read
you,
it.
Ramia?
Yeah.
Would you
yeah,
want to
and
live
I think it
forever?
starts off innocent enough too, because the very beginning scene is of her being basically married away at a very young age in an arranged marriage of somebody she doesn't
Yeah. We were
know,
all in that position like, oh, I would take the deal too, ma'am.
right?
Let's do
So
it.
I think it was an easy choice for her, but the rest of the book sort of deals with the consequences of
Exactly.
that, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
There are a lot of themes of legacy and what you leave behind.
Mm.
And I'm paraphrasing, but there's a point where she asks Luke, the god that granted her this bargain, how do you live forever? How do you live for 300 years? And he says, like you do any life, for 1 second at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the moment.
Mm.
But
That's
she's
deep.
cursed out of that, right? Because her moments don't exist. They disappear behind her.
Right, because if you're immortal and nothing you do stays behind,
Yep.
like,
What are you leaving
what
behind?
are you?
Yeah, what are you?
And I think the book does a great job of being stylish as well. I don't think it's any accident that the book is styled the way it is. You have this trope of, the devil being extremely stylish with the, French sort of accent and background and wearing, all these clothes, which is reminiscent of, the show Lucifer, if people have watched
Yes.
that
I
one.
love Luke. He was one of my
I
favorite
Oh,
characters.
know. I looked
But
forward to their moments through the entire thing.
And she's also attracted to him
Yes.
because he
Yeah.
was based on like her drawings of like her ideal man. And there's something deeply
exactly.
devious about having your tormentor be like your dream person, your
Yeah.
dream partner.
yeah, again, another scene that sticks out for me is when she sort of devises a way of hanging on to things and setting up her own apartment and stealing and doing whatever. And she's doing it all for Luke, and he doesn't show up. And then
Show
sometime
up, yeah.
later, he
Oh,
references that, hey,
it's
remember
so
when you were looking
evil.
for me? And like he knows and throws that back in her face. And that was just, I
Those
had
were
to put
intense moments.
the book down at that point. Yeah.
Yeah,
for
like there
me.
were really intense moments. I know, Jacob, like I totally agree with you. There really isn't much plot to this book, but there were moments that felt frustrating or like really brought out the anxiety of like what's going to happen this time they meet. Because every time they meet, the dynamic gets a little stronger. The tension gets a little deeper, So I honestly spent a lot of time thinking, is he going to show up now?
Especially there's so much tension because sometimes they hadn't seen each other for 20, 30
Exactly.
years.
Exactly. But what is 20, 30 years when you're living forever, right?
And I know
Nothing.
we're going to talk
Exactly.
about
Although
taboos.
time is still flies at the same
Yeah.
rate as it does for us, right? So
Yeah.
it still feels like an extremely long time.
Amer, you have this quote that you put into our outline. I'm stronger than your God and older than your devil. I'm the darkness between stars and the roots beneath the earth. I'm promise and potential, and when it comes to playing games, I define the rules, I set the pieces, and I choose when to play. And tonight, I say number?
Not today.
Not today.
yeah, yeah. For context, that was a line read by Luke.
Okay.
So,
I was like, I didn't say this.
no, that's definitely a Luke line.
That's definitely, if you had to guess, which god
Yeah,
did
exactly.
this?
Who said?
Yeah, who said this? Oh, man. What a good book.
I know we're going to talk about taboo subjects a little later on, but I found that was interesting in this particular book that she touched on a couple of taboo subjects very, very lightly, but she did. There's a little bit of LGBTQ with one of her lovers being of the same sex, and then some taboo-ish things like, how do you make a living when you can't hold down a job, right? You have these different situations where she finds different ways of getting things or being employed or whatever, of staying with people, because without money, how do you live, right?
Yeah, I think that stuff like that was brought up, like you said, in situations or in passing of other characters as well, right? But she had to be crafty. Like, she really had to be resourceful and crafty to kind of get through navigating the curse. Because there's that ebb and flow, right? Where you're like, I'm free. Oh my gosh, I'm screwed. Oh my gosh, I have to live with this forever. So those
Right.
phases
And
came
how do you
with
make
Exactly.
a living if you can't make an effect on anything since
Exactly.
nobody remembers you and you can't keep things for your own? Like, she couldn't hold down a
Exactly.
job because nobody remembers her.
Exactly. She essentially had to be
Exactly.
like a
So you have
puppet
to
master.
steal.
Yeah.
And on the other side of it, because of her long life, she knows the best of things, right? So she's in this weird conundrum where she can't hold down a job, but she knows how to get like the best cake in New York, or she knows where the best spot is for for music in New York, and all these sort of secret things that most of us wouldn't know about ever.
She had her whole life to explore these things.
I wanted to bring something up regarding this book. And have any of you ever heard of the rule of cool?
No.
The rule
No.
of
Tell
cool
us.
is basically a concept in writing that if something is cool enough, then you're allowed to break all the rules.
Ooh.
And I think this
interesting.
originated in Dungeons and Dragons, where if a player wants to do something crazy and the dungeon master says, yeah, that breaks the rules, but screw it.
Okay. Wait.
It's that concept. I think that applies here all the time because there are rules in storytelling that we want to tell ourselves that there are no rules when you're writing. But I think we generally want
We know.
character development,
Yeah,
a
story
start,
arc.
a middle, and an end. Like there is an arc that we generally want when we're reading novels, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we were going through scenes that don't push the plot forward, they're really cool. So they just allow it to happen.
But it happened for too long. Is that what you're saying? Is there a point?
Yeah.
Is there an opinion?
Yeah,
Come
no, I'll say this book was too long. This book was too long. If it was half as long, 10 hours, I don't care. Like, I would have liked it a lot more.
Why didn't
it
you
kind
just
of
speed it
overstayed
up?
in welcome.
Did you speed it up?
Well, yeah, I sped it up, but like not
Yeah,
ridiculously so.
I want to
1.2.
know
Uh-huh.
and ask Jacob. Did you honestly, let's be real for a second. Did you just skip a few?
I
few
didn't skip
Would
a
never.
thing. Yo, you two,
Sacrilege.
you four know me better that I'm a completionist. I
You
do
are.
not skip chapters and I read entire books. I never leave a book unfinished.
Whew. He sat through 17 hours.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, I think if you're recommending this to somebody else, I mean, letting them know that it's a slow burn is probably not a bad idea.
Yeah.
I personally had a lot of trouble watching the movie Arrival because the burn was so slow. It was just like my mind was wandering throughout watching it. And I didn't have the same effect for this book for sure because the writing is so captivating.
that's what I'm saying. Like, around the table, I think we can all agree that writing was impeccable.
Yes,
And
yeah.
poetic and beautiful. The curse itself was enough, or the synopsis or whatever, the recommendation was enough to be like, oh yeah, I'll check this out. But the biggest, for me, it was almost an oversight that there was no plot development or like barely. And for you, Jacob, coming from fantasy, you're like, where's all the plot at?
That's a personal thing, though.
Yeah.
I think that just comes with my background reading almost like exclusively fantasy, and I had
Yes.
my expectations going into it that I think clouded my experience to a
So
certain
if you
extent.
didn't think this was fantasy, still too long. Rule of cool
Good
was
question.
overused.
I don't. No, it's still too long.
Okay, all right. Fine, let's move to taboos.
The last comment I had on that was just to ask Jacob how short his fantasy books are typically.
No! How
Oh,
long
they're
is
like
the...
20 hours minimum
Yeah, how long
But
is
you know
the
why that's
Lies
okay?
of Loch
because there's plot in it.
Okay, all right. Do you have anything else to say?
Must have plot. Okay.
No,
good to
move
know.
on, moving on.
Oh, yeah? I'll give you one more second. Any last liners? This is your last chance.
I thought this was an open space here.
Yeah, we lied.
For a limited time.
It's open season.
Wow.
All right, fine. Jacob and I, just for some context, we did do like a cold swap of recommendations. So my recommendation to him was The Invisible Life, which he has completed. And I am still in chapter 2 of The Lies of Loch Lamora, which was his recommendation to me. So,
Yeah, that's an unfair swap.
yeah. Huh? We're not going to talk about quality yet. I have to finish first for the feedback of swapping. But how long is that book, though?
22.
Okay, there you go. See? All right. Okay, so as you said, Amer, we're going to talk taboos for a quick second because we've been pulling out these responses to the question, what was the last taboo book you read and how did it sit with you? Greg David, our communication specialist here at AMI, says the last book I read that explored a taboo topic was The Catcher and the Rye. Is it The Catcher in the Rye? Yes,
The Catcher in the Rye, yeah.
in the Rye. I was in grade 8 and it was assigned reading over a Christmas holiday. I remember at the time being more annoyed that I was assigned something to read over Christmas because, well, homework. As a result, it didn't resonate with me back then, and I remember thinking, what's the big deal? It was only when I was older and learned about The Catcher in the Rye being considered controversial or taboo that I returned to it in my 20s and appreciated what J.D. Salinger's story was really about. It's funny to me that it's still one of the most challenged books out there due to swearing, drinking, smoking, sex, challenging family values, and tales of rebellion. So tame compared to some of the other stuff out there, which is actually facts. And then we got some quotes from Catcher in the Rye. Did you do this, Jacob?
Yeah, that was me. So this book, really good of you to bring this up, Greg, because it is super taboo, but like, what exactly is taboo about it?
Yeah.
I'd argue that it's because it's the themes of rebellion more than anything, because this book is all about teenage angst and how that actually manifests itself. And if everybody, because I think what it does is it seems to legitimize that teenage angst a little bit, or at least that's how a lot of people interpret it.
The teenage angst part, is that when you're saying bring it up, like why it's brought up in school?
I think it's because if everybody had that teenage angst, then the world would not work. And it's deeply uncomfortable because this book kind of makes the point that there are really good reasons to have that teenage angst and to think that everyone is as phony as they are. And phony is a word that they use all the time in this book.
Really?
And something that's really illustrative is this scene where Holden Caulfield, the main character, goes to a hotel piano bar. And he describes the pianist there as, yeah, he's really good, but he's good in a way that he knows he's good, and he's such a phony, and I hate him.
Oh my God. Nothing to do with piano playing.
And one of my favorite quotes is, people clap for all the wrong reasons.
Ooh.
Which is true. So why are you clapping there? Because he's actually a good pianist or because he's being really chauvinistic? It's a deeply cynical book.
I love it. Okay, here's one of the quotes you said, and you called these illustrative quotes from Catcher in the Rye. I'm always saying, glad to have met you, to someone I'm not at all glad I met. That's kind of fair, no?
You kind of have to do those
It
things
is
to stay
fair.
alive.
Yeah.
Like, whenever you meet somebody, you always say nice to meet you. But let's say you meet somebody and you say nice to meet you and you become friends and you find out this person is a real not
Phony.
so nice person. Phony. Right. Perfect. A real phony. Then was it really nice to meet him?
No.
We
And
just
also-
do these things because we have to.
Yeah.
It's
cultural
so
norm.
true because we
It's
don't need to do
politeness.
these things. It's just the polite thing, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
because
know,
the
like,
second part of this
you-
quote was, if you want to stay alive, you have to say that stuff, though. I think that it's funny the way that Greg worded it, where where he just like lumped all the taboo things that you could ever find taboo, and this book explores all of that stuff. So is it just taboo for being taboo? You know what I mean? Like I'm thinking about it in the writing side. Is it just more interesting to write taboo, and therefore you stick in as much taboo as you possibly can in a book to see if it'll get banned or whatever?
I think that it all pertains to whether the author or not like intended to be edgy or
Yes, yeah.
taboo, right? Because if he was just trying to make a genuine point about teenage angst and what it's like to be a 16-year-old at that time, it's really not that big a deal.
Kind of off topic, but is it interesting to pick up Catcher in the Rye now? I didn't read it in school. Have all of you guys
What
read it?
people say all the time is that this book hits differently depending on how old you are.
Ooh.
Because I read it when I was 16, and I absolutely did relate to his teenage angst. And it's like, yeah,
Okay.
people are phonies. But when you read it as an adult,
Yeah.
you see it like, oh, I
Adult
used to be
phonies.
like that. And I've moved on from that. It gives you perspective on sometimes, yeah, the world is kind of phony, but it's not the deal breaker that this book makes it out to be.
Maybe it's like the high school never ends.
And the writing, sorry, I have so much to say about this book.
Go.
The writing in this book is written like a 16-year-old would write. Like, it's not good writing, but it's very engaging. Like, he says anyway all the time. It's really weird.
Okay, but I hope it's not like Try Hard 16.
Oh, yeah, it
Exactly,
absolutely is
Jenny.
Try Hard 16.
Oh, no. Well, that's going to turn me off.
Oh,
trying to
this
read
might be
book.
good.
Yeah.
It's
we'll
like
see.
now everybody says like,
Yeah.
it was like this.
You know,
What did you do? I went like to the mall and I did like this, and so
See, when we're doing it, it sounds like we're trying to be Try Hard 16.
Yeah, could you imagine reading a book that's written like that? Dear God.
Yeah, but that's why we're saying with the anyway. Is it written like that with anyway?
Yeah, kind of.
yeah.
He
see,
literally finished his sentences and stuff.
Oh, no.
and
I'm
stuff.
going to have a problem. I can't
Definitely 16-year-old.
imagine reading this now.
The other thing with this book is that it's kind of inextricably tied with the murder of John Lennon. Have you heard about this?
No.
Yeah, so back in 1980, John Lennon, the lead singer of the Beatles, got murdered by one of his stalkers. And the stalker had the Catcher in the Rye in his coat
What?
at the time. And
That's crazy.
he, even after the murder, the murderer always talked about how Catcher in the Rye is like his Bible.
Okay.
Because he saw the world as being incredibly phony, and John Lennon was the king of the phonies.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh,
That is so
yikes.
deep.
Oh.
Also, look at Jacob schooling us like on so much more than just literature today.
Young adult genre is so popular now, and this seems to fit right into that sort of slot, even though
Yeah,
it
even
was
now.
written quite some time ago. Yeah.
Timeless. Catcher in the Rye. Also, you can use it as a Bible.
No,
Debbie,
don't do that. No.
Don't do Amer. What? That's what I took away from this convo. It's an open space.
You're on a watch list.
Now
now.
we're all gonna read it and compare notes.
Compare notes and go psych deep dive into John Lennon's death.
In general, don't
Wow.
walk around with books in your
your
pockets, right?
Yeah, later it will be used as a case study against you. Amer and Debbie, this was really fun. We got to a lot of everything. I think Jacob has really truly said his piece about Invisible Life. Who knows? Maybe it'll come up again in future episodes. But Debbie, you're ditching us. Amer, you're going to stick around because we got lots more with you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review. As I said, we've got more book talk coming your way. Amer Khan has 3 books he wants to highlight by a different author. We'll get to that in a second. Welcome back. This is AMI Audiobook Review, where we chat all things audiobooks, and we have a guest who's stuck around from the first half, Amer Khan. He's actually our regular contributor. We call him the audiobook worm because he reads more than anyone I know. And you want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly about one author. I actually think that it's not as much bad and ugly as it is good, yeah?
Not at all. Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about Isabel Allende. Tell me how you came across her.
So Isabel Allende is actually a very famous author that I didn't know about, but I came across her book because I was looking at a NPR list of the most anticipated reads of 2023, And I took a look at this book. I didn't actually end up reading that book, um, but I took a look at what was available on the Sila library for her and found a book called Zorro, the superhero Zorro. And ever since we did that book for the Kelly and Ramya book club called Hench, I've been looking, sort of keeping my eyes open for a superhero story I can sort of get behind and read. And I've always been a fan of Zorro. So I thought, okay, let's see what this is about, and I was absolutely blown away.
So I just want to go back to after reading Hench because Hench was not so loved by majority of the book club when we read it. So I
Indeed.
just want to say, like, that's really shocking that after Hench, you're like, I'm going to keep exploring this.
I knew there were good superhero books out there.
Oh, I
I
see.
just had to find them. So I did an
You were
active
trying to go
search, and then
to
I sort of set it
some healing.
behind, and then I came across this author, and I'm like, Zorro, yeah, that sounds interesting.
Hmm.
So after completing Zorro and being totally um, impressed by it, I took a closer look at the author herself, Isabel Allende, and learned quite a bit. So unsurprisingly for me, after reading the book, she is a very famous author. She's about 81 now. She sold over, I believe, 77 million copies of her books worldwide in
Wow.
33 languages. She's got upwards of more than 19 best-selling novels throughout her time as an author. One of her first books, House of the Spirits, is actually a movie, I believe. And her background is from Chile. She lives in the US right now, but I describe most of her books as very passionate no matter what they're about. So interestingly enough, as I sort of looked at what items to read for her next, I ended up reading three of her novels back to back, which is why I picked the three for talking about them in this segment of mine. Um, but interestingly enough, they're not the ones she's the most known for or the famous for.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Did
she's
you know
actually
what she's was very well known for before picking these books
no,
or
I
after?
didn't.
Okay.
After, definitely.
Hmm.
And you know, I went to YouTube to take a look at her life and times, and there's a very great interview with Al Jazeera English by a well-known interviewer named David Frost. It's about an hour long with Isabel Allende, and she talks and he goes through her life in terms of what sort of shaped her, how she does her writing, and the various high points of her life and career. And it's truly amazing. I mean, not too many authors have been a flag bearer at the Olympics. She's obviously received numerous awards. She also has a foundation to help women, and it sort of ties into her life story and her most famous books. Her first book, The House of the Spirits, was basically inspired by her when she was living in Venezuela in exile from Chile, and her grandfather was not doing well and was close to passing away, and she started to write him letters as sort of a goodbye, and that basically was the impetus to turn into her first book called House of the Spirits. And she was raised in a typical sort of Chilean household where, you know, she was raised Catholic, but at the same time there was a lot of superstition sort of mixed in, and her books really shine through with that sort of motif. The second book is a very different one that she's most well known for. It's called Paula, and Paula was actually her daughter who passed away at the age of, I believe, 29 or 30
Hmm.
after a year-long illness. And the sort of style of the book is about her writing to her daughter as if she would basically come back to life and start living her life where she left off after death.
Mm.
Um, and it's a very powerful book. It's obviously something that's sort of worldwide and known for a lot of things. Obviously, not a very light book. It's going to be pretty heavy, but those are the two that she's the most famous for.
No, it sounds like that one explores a lot of themes of grief. If I'm just exploring it on a really shallow level like that, based on your description, do you think this was a way for her to adjust to that loss? It was part of her grieving process?
I think so. I think in general, I mean, I describe her as a writer's writer. I think writing is central focus for her life in all things. And with a life event like that, I think it's no surprise that she would turn to writing to sort of explore and understand. her grief in that process. And in the interview, she goes over what her writing process is, and a lot of the times she picks up a certain theme. She knows a beginning and she knows an end, and then basically the characters sort of come to life as she writes in terms of plot and their emotional sort of motivations for things.
So, do you want to talk about the three books? Do they share anything in common, the ones you read? And by the way, did you read these back to back?
I read these back to back pretty much, and the I think the only thing that really ties them together is her style of writing. As I said earlier, she's a very passionate writer. It's very easy to read her books because she is an absolute storyteller. I mean, when you're reading these books, sometimes I talk about books feeling like you're watching a movie, or what kind of feeling you get when you actually read books. For her books, it's like sitting sort of in front of a fireplace and somebody is doing like an oral tradition and telling you a story.
I
It
love that.
really, really feels like that. She's so dedicated to her characters in terms of what's their emotional and logical thinking processes that you really bond with the characters in all her books. But the three books, I'll go over the names, and it's fairly self-explanatory that these are very, very different books. I mean, the first one is Zorro, which is a superhero story. It goes over a retelling of the Zorro sort of myth and legend from the Western United States to Spain and back. The second book I read is called My Invented Country. And it's got a longer title, but that's the sort of the beginning part of the title, and that really speaks. It's more autobiographical, and it explores her feelings and thoughts about um, her exile, and how when you're an immigrant, you never really feel like you're home, even in your new place, because you can't go back to your old place because the old place is now changed because of certain events or politics or whatever it is. And again, she colors the autobiography with so many, she loves stories as well as telling them. And in her family she had so many stories. I mean, my personal favorite is of a relative of hers who used to take his pants off in public and give it to the poor. um, and Jacob, you were talking about showmanship earlier and chauvinism, and like apparently this relative had such a high opinion of himself that in his will he asked his family to bury him upright
What a
so that he
phony.
could
Oh my!
so that he could look God in the eye when he arrived at the gates of heaven.
Oh
Oh
dear.
my
Oh,
God.
all right. Wow.
Okay, buddy.
So
This is getting
again,
extreme.
you have these moments of like you have to put the book down, chuckle for about 5 minutes, come back to
Is
it
this
because
real?
she's such a yeah, it is real. And again, not only is she passionate, but it looks like people of Chile are quite passionate about what they do and how they do it. And she sort of describes that whole sort of spectrum of it in the book in terms of how Chilean society is in terms of being so dedicated towards bureaucracy and democracy, to the point that even after a fascist overtaking, as Pinochet was a dictator, he wanted to legitimize himself as a political leader and put a referendum type of thing to the people, saying, okay, well, confirm that I'm your legitimate, basically, leader, and they all rejected it. So I mean, even a dictator tried to use an element of democracy to legitimize himself, which backfired and actually ended his dictatorship. And she points all of these pieces out. And specific attention towards the role, gender roles in terms of male and female throughout time, as well as how that sort of shaped Chilean society and what it is to be,
Mm.
female today in Chile and in the United States.
It's pretty I think entertaining to write stuff like this, or it could be, depending on the I say characters, but the people that you're writing about. So I think where I'm asking you, did she do it justice?
Absolutely. I mean, I think she enjoys writing it, but I mean, we enjoy reading it. I mean,
Mm.
they're books that you just fall in love with. Really, is the best way to describe it. Um, the last book I read of hers was called The Long Petal of the Sea. And for those who are very much into poetry will recognize it. Pablo Neruda, who's a Nobel-winning poet from Chile, is a big influence on her, and is a part of sort of the fabric of Chilean society. Everybody knows Pablo Neruda, and she uses a lot of his quotes throughout her books to open chapters and things like that. But he described Chile geographically as the long petal of the sea, just because of how it's situated and how it's sort of geographically shaped as, a thin country that sort of curves like that and comes out to Antarctica at the bottom of South America. So the book is actually a very long and sweeping uh, sort of historical fiction of a particular character named Victor. And Victor is originally from Spain, and who's fleeing a dictator named Franco, who was a real character. And from Spain, he ends up in France. Of course, he's in France, but France was not too pleasant towards foreigners at the time. The Second World War was also looming, and he ended up going to Chile. And in Chile, he was doing well. He became a doctor. This sort of story. And then Chile had a dictator in the form of Pinochet, so he had to flee again to Venezuela, which is not all that different from her own sort of family and life story. And again, it's a very passionately told storyline of historical fiction. She does a lot of research for her pieces, so it actually reads very much like nonfiction, and pretty much all of the coloring details that she puts in are facts in real life.
Mm.
Amer, I'd like to back up a little bit. Earlier, you described her as being a writer's writer. Do you want to elaborate on that? What does that mean?
Well, I mean, at the time of the interview, the Al Jazeera English interview with David Frost, her mother was still alive in her 90s, and they still write letters to each other every day. So, in terms of writing and being able to read, and that's, I think, a central part of her core in terms of, being able to write, being able to read, and just doing it every day. I mean, I don't think any of us write letters to our mothers every day. Like that's,
Barely put in a
like
text.
in the
Probably
interview, she
should.
literally pulls drawers, and she's actually saved them too. So it's not just the writing part; it's about saving them, and she even uses them for research for her books. There's a part in the interview where she has a character who's falling in love in her 80s, and she calls up her, she doesn't have to call up her mom and ask her. She just goes to the drawer, finds the letters, and you know it takes a look and see what the mindset is.
So, an author that doesn't just do it because it's a career, does
Yeah.
it because it's
No.
part of her
Yeah.
soul. It comes to her easily.
Yeah, I mean, she's had periods in her life where it hasn't come to her easily as well, but I think it's something that she has to do, right? I mean, there's certain musicians and certain artists, and there's some people who are so passionate about what they do is that it's just part of their DNA that they would be doing it even if they weren't paid for it. And I think she strikes me as one of those people. She actually has a TED talk as well on how to live your life passionately. So
I love that.
that's the more you learn about her, the more you want to know more. Is the sort of the effect of Isabel Allende.
When you said writer's writer, I just assumed that she's gorgeous at what she does. Back to The Invisible Life, V.E. Schwab. But I guess not.
That too. I mean, obviously she's got she's got a commanding
Yeah.
understanding of the English language, and also obviously of Spanish, because that's her upbringing. So she's actually known as the most prolific Spanish author of our time. In most places. So
Spanish in the sense of Spanish language, not necessarily
Spanish language,
from
yes.
Spain, right?
Yeah.
Here's a quote from, what is the last one? The Petals of the Sea?
The Long Petal of the Sea.
There you go. My bad. This one, because I'm just thinking of how eloquently she puts some of these very big concepts. She says, we have to defend democracy, but remember that not everything is politics. Without science, industry, and technology, no progress is possible. And without music and art, there's no soul. It's kind of nice how she wraps that, eh?
Absolutely.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like her.
And going back to Zorro, I mean, I didn't talk about it much because again, we have these heavier books to run around, but Zorro does a fantastic job of not only describing the landscape and the adventure and all the parts that we come to know and love about superhero stories, but she does a great job of putting a modern context to a lot of touchier issues. Not only in terms of exile, but in terms of Spanish missionaries that first came to the United States, along with elements of the Spanish American War, along with First Nations people and the interaction of all of those sort of parties, and does a great job of not glossing over it, but also not diving into so much detail that the book becomes about something else. The main character is obviously Zorro, but his sidekick, or however you want to say it, is actually somebody who is a First Nations person. So it's really fascinating to see how that is all shaped, and how she brings these characters to life in another retelling.
You're a very well-read person, Amer, and like just from reading one book of hers, you picked up a whole bunch of others and went into a deep dive. I'm curious if there's anything that you felt you challenged yourself on with these reads, because most of them seem very heavy-hitting.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'd like to think I'm quite well read, but in terms of the Spanish Civil War, or even Chile, I mean, I knew sort of broad strokes and pieces, but nothing to the level of detail that she brings to light, right? Even in even in her, the My Invented Country, her thoughts and feelings about being exiled, and what that's like, and how unbelievable it was. I mean, I think a lot of us have read books from the Second World War, especially accounts of in France, where people just couldn't believe that uh, anti-Semitism was happening, or that the Germans would actually
Right.
take over, and how their democracy would just be shattered so quickly. And you see that those elements in Chile as well, where it was unimaginable for Chileans to think that their democracy would crumble at all, and how the United States had such a big part in dismantling it, is also something I wasn't so aware of. And there's a scene in that particular book where she describes, the Chilean society is so into bureaucracy that if you went to somewhere to basically, if there was a mistake, that they put you in the death certificate in the newspaper, in the obituaries, if you came to them and said, no, I'm still alive, I'm here, they'd ask for like 3 different copies of of things to prove that you're still alive,
Oh my
even though
gosh.
you're standing right in front of them. So
Yeah, that's
um
very convoluted stuff.
Hmm. I find historical fiction is one of the most powerful ways to retell history
Yep.
or to learn history, because it is fictional in the sense the characters are fictional, but the settings are very, if they're well researched, representative of the feeling at the time.
yes.
There's a really popular historian and podcaster called Dan Carlin that produces these like 8-hour long podcasts of just him talking, which might as well just be an audiobook at that point.
Mm.
And one of the things he does that I absolutely love is that he really relies on firsthand accounts. And instead of focusing on dates and numbers and policy, he focuses on the people on the ground and what they were thinking and the mood at the
Ooh,
time.
yeah.
And you can represent all those things really well in the form of a story more than anything.
Absolutely. And Isabel Allende does that so very well in terms of capturing that mood in pieces. And, what happens with a lot of historical fiction is there's some poetic license that's taken, and there's some scenes that are like unbelievable. And I came across some of those in The Long Petal of the Sea, and I looked them up, and they were actually real things, which is mind blowing. I mean, there's a scene in the book where, you know, planes from the Chilean Air Force go and bomb the presidential palace.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, whoa, that's a crazy scene. How did you think of that? And you go to
And then you go
Wikipedia, or you
back and
go,
you're like,
and
that's
like, that
real.
actually happened.
See,
So
and
it's like,
that's the part where we have to
whoa.
take accountability as the reader, right? When you're talking historical fiction, as powerful as it is, you don't know where the author has drawn that line, what part is left for interpretation, what part is actually pulling from history. So it's more effective when you can go and start digging, but not all of us do that. So
Yeah.
you can take
And
it or
I
leave it.
wanted to just give a shout out to the narrators for her books too. I mean, I read all 3 of these on Sela, and all 3 had absolutely fantastic narration. I always am pleased when the narrator matches with the book in
Mm-hmm.
a lot of ways. I mean, there's a lot of Spanish content in terms of pronunciations and things, and whoever they chose for the different books were right on the money in terms of making it feel authentic and being authentic.
Cool. And we'll wrap there, Amer. Thank you so much. Chat next month.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds great. Take care.
Amer Khan, the audiobook worm, joining us on the last episode of the month, as always. And we're wrapping up now. We'll be back next week with Karen and Teresa from the Center for Equitable Library Access. They're back with their monthly convos, and that's always good. I'm your host, Ramya Amuddin, with co-host Jacob Szymanski. And until next week, technical producer Nisreen Abdelmajid, always working the magic behind the scenes.
How could you forget?
I'm sorry, I never forget. She's always with me. Until next time, happy audiobook listening.
Damn. Damn, I remember that.
AMI's Described Video Guide lists television programming available for viewers who are blind or partially sighted. From dramas to sitcoms, documentaries to movies, children's programming to animated series, AMI's Described Video Guide has it all. For a comprehensive list of described television programming in Canada, visit ami.ca/dvguide or call toll-free 1-855-855-1144. I'm Greg David, Communication Specialist at AMI.